All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody.
Perfect.
Welcome back to LlamaIndex sessions. My name is Jerry, co-founder, CEO of LlamaIndex, and I'm joined by Stelios. Sorry, let me just kind of rewind that. What's the kind of like title you want me to introduce you with?
Head of research.
Head of data science and research. Head of research. Okay, cool. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of LlamaIndex sessions. I'm Jerry. I'm co-founder, CEO of LlamaIndex, and today we're joined by Stelios, head of research at MQube. So we're super excited to talk about some of the apps that Stelios has built using generative AI, LlamaIndex, and also some of the lessons that he's learned along the way in building retrieval augmented generation systems. So Stelios, welcome. And first, we'd love to just get a quick overview about yourself and your team and what you guys are working on.
Hey, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. It's a great fun being here. We've all been fans of building with LlamaIndex, so it's great to be here. So like you've said, I'm the head of research at MQube. MQube is a tech company in the UK working in the mortgage lending space. So basically, we've been using AI to be able to automate many parts of the mortgage application process. We also have a lending arm ourselves. So basically, we're able to give mortgages to people. And if you'd like, I can go into a bit more details about where the RAG app fits into this.
Yeah, let's do it. Maybe talk about like the use case that the app that you're building solves, and kind of like the type of data that you're using.
Yeah. So like many people in the audience might have gotten a mortgage. Everybody has had like different experiences with it. In general, it tends to be a very complicated process, and a key intermediary in the whole ecosystem is the mortgage broker. So let's say I want to go get a mortgage, but there are 50 different lenders, possibly hundreds of lenders, all of them having different interest rates, different fixed terms. So usually people go to a mortgage broker where they kind of tell them about their situation, how long they're thinking about staying in the house, different things about themselves. And then the mortgage broker essentially advises them on what mortgage product is better for them. So a key part of that is the mortgage broker kind of knowing the different criteria of all the different lenders. So this is things like, for example, some lenders might not accept applicants from overseas. They might not lend on specific type of properties. They might assess your income differently. And so it's a lot of different things about yourself, the property, and a key part of what the mortgage broker does is trying to find the best deal that fits with your situation. So a big part of what they do is going around into the websites of different lenders, and possibly the very popular ones, they already know what type of applications they accept, but they still go to the websites of the different lenders and then try to go through basically many pages of different types of criteria about the property, about the income, and then navigate through them and kind of, if they have questions about the specific situation of the applicant, then they dig more into the criteria, or in some cases when they're really confused and they can't understand what's going on, they might call up the lender, sometimes over the phone, sometimes through a chat app. This is kind of like the overall real life context. And I'll share my screen just because we're like talking about what criteria look like.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is the Empowered website. And if I go over here, this is our lending criteria. So this is, I'll just go through some of them. This is, for example, an example of criteria. Empowered can accept applicants who have been bankrupt under specific circumstances. And this goes on and on. So basically, in the context of the RAG app, this is our knowledge base and what we've used for the retrieval part of the RAG app. So
Sweet. Out of curiosity, just a quick follow-up question there. Is the data for this criteria, is it usually in website form? Do you have like PDFs? And is it usually a lot of like little things? Like for instance, on that, like you click on something and there's like a short paragraph, or is it usually like can it also be like a giant blob of text?
That's a great question. So this is our public-facing criteria. They're mostly very readable, sizable bits where we focused on clarity. So they tend to be, like, as you've noticed, many small articles. And actually the knowledge base itself is not massive. In terms of its size, it's an actually very small knowledge base. And this is a reason that we're actually not using a vector database. We're storing all of it in memory, and we're doing the retrieval part basically in memory. Something that made me interesting to bring up here is that actually there is a much bigger version of this knowledge base that's kind of our internal policy, but this contains, it's not readable at all. It's in a style that's very much more operational than user-friendly. So something that we faced building this app, and we can go into more details later if that's interesting, is how do we keep the two knowledge bases aligned? We've played a bit with using metadata from the private knowledge base to help retrieval. So I think this is something that like must be happening a lot in real life. Organizations having different types of potentially multi-modal knowledge bases.
Yeah, 100%. And just to double check, so you mentioned you build like a chatbot, like an application over this data. Is it over any set of criteria, or is it currently over like the empowered criteria that you guys have?
Yeah, this is just internally for ourselves. So this is only for empowered, and this is to make the communication of our customers seamless with us.
Got it. Cool, makes sense. And then kind of going on to the application itself, could you describe a little bit about like what the user experience is like in terms of the chatbot?
Yeah, 100%. I can actually show you. So I'm not sure if probably people in the audience are already familiar. This is the interface that pops up here is provided by HubSpot. So this is the chat interface provided by HubSpot, and we've integrated RAG app as an API in here. So we didn't build a separate interface for that. And the reason is, and that was quite important for us, that we hoped that we would automate a big part of those questions, but we also wanted to make it very easy for people to still speak to the customer support. So having a single channel of communication is the reason why we used HubSpot. So this is really exciting. I'm really happy to be doing a demo. So I'll just go through the journey. So I'll just go through the flow. I'm a broker who's gone onto the chat interface. I'm being asked whether I've signed up with Empowered or not. And then, how can we help you today? I have a criteria question. So at this point, we're just getting some generic pieces of information. If you're unsure about the response, we're still urging the broker to reach out to customer support. And this is where they get to type in their question. And this goes directly as input to the RAG app. So I'll start with, like, we can do an easy example, which would be, for example, what's your maximum LTV? LTV is a very specific term in lending. It's about how big your loan to value ratio is. So this is something that brokers look around for every time.
Nice.
So this is a response coming back, and as you might, I'll open up the link. As you might have noticed, we're also returning the link of the relevant piece of criteria. This is so that at this point, we're still encouraging the broker to maybe check it out themselves or open it up for additional information.
Sweet.
So this
this is like integrated all as part of the kind of like overall customer support experience, right? So like if they picked another option, you might go through like a traditional customer support flow, but since they ask like a criteria question, they're routing it to CriteriaGPT.
Exactly. And as you've said, like the option to speak to broker support is just over here.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing anything with the feedback itself, or is it mostly just for logging and tracking purposes right now?
So at the moment, we're only doing it for logging purposes, like seeing the questions where the model said, I don't know, or seeing the kind of the questions that made the broker speak to broker support. And this is kind of how we're building up our user experience evaluation based on the user still choosing to speak to broker support, even though they've gotten back an answer from the RAG app.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that awesome demo. The next piece of this is I wanted to go over kind of like the stop piece that you talked about, which is like 4 lessons from launching an LLM chatbot. It seems like this went from like prototype to actually production, and it's actually deployed on your website, and that's something that's really exciting. And in the process, you had some pretty cool lessons, and would love for you to kind of give an overview of that and some of the biggest things that you learned from building and productionizing this chatbot.
100%. As you said, we've actually deployed this in production. It's been live for, I think it's been 6 or 7 weeks now. We've gotten really strong feedback from brokers, and this has actually helped close 1/3, actually 40% of all chats without human intervention. This has been a massive bump from what we had before. So we've been really pleased with that, because it's one of those things that we've all been hearing for maybe 1 year now with ChatGPT about how generative AI will change the workforce. So this is actually an example of a generative AI app having some actual business outcome. Then in terms of the lessons learned, as you said, we kind of started with the prototype and then moved it into a beta phase, still through HubSpot, where we collected lots of feedback, brokers engaged with that. And I think our experience in terms of building this with LlamaIndex specifically, we haven't actually changed the key inference code, for example, is still quite small. LlamaIndex made it very easy to build a demo, and then made it easy to get it in production for kind of a different way, in the sense that what we found out was that the key part of moving this from dev to prod was just experimenting with all the different retrieval mechanisms, synthesis mechanisms, and then focusing very heavily on the evaluation. So, for example, when we started, we were not very sure how to tell if we're ready to go to prod with this. Like, we could go. So, what we were experimenting at first was collating our own evaluation set, maybe of 50 or 60 questions, and then building up our own evaluation metrics, stuff like blur, which is what's used throughout NLP, and then trying to work out how many of the questions we get correct. We didn't really get very far with that. We found the results not super interpretable. But what was a game changer, and I think we've talked about this before, was using GPT-4 to do the evaluation. It seems to only work with GPT-4 and not other LLMs at the moment. But we found massive levels of alignment between ourselves assessing the response of the RAG gap and GPT's response of the RAG gap. So in terms of end-to-end evaluation, for the last few months, we've been going ahead with relying on GPT-4 in terms of the evaluation.
Awesome. So you're basically, you are using GPT-4 as the judge, and as opposed to quantitative metrics like Blue and Rouge scores. Are you feeding in the ground truth and comparing it? Like what does a prompt look like in terms of evaluation?
Yeah, exactly. So we have some historic conversations from the live chats. We've had the live chats without the gap for ages. So we've got lots of historic conversations along with the response that the broker support gave to the broker. So this serves as the ground truth. So we're feeding the input to CriteriaGPT. This is how we're calling a RAG gap, getting back the response. And then we're asking GPT-4, how do those two compare to each other? Does it look like the answer is essentially the same?
Yeah, makes sense. So you're actually like in the process, like able to curate a data set by aggregating some of this user feedback that you logged through the app. So you kind of have this like feedback loop going on basically.
Exactly. And you can use, we're using GPT-4 for online evaluations in other ways as well. For example, we mentioned earlier having a different knowledge base that's kind of private. So we want to be checking that the answer from the public-facing knowledge base aligns with the answer according to the private knowledge base. So this is a test that we're running in the background, sometimes again using GPT-4 as the judge. And
another aspect here is, so through evaluation, maybe you find like there are some gaps, or maybe you find that through qualitative evaluation too, that sometimes the model doesn't know how to answer things, whether it's because it doesn't have the right context or because it's like hallucinating. What are the main things that you're doing to try to improve this? Is it like prompting? Is it other aspects too? Like what are the levers that you're trying to tweak to try to actually improve the performance of your RAG app?
Yeah, this is a great question. So at first we were experimenting. I think this is the first, possibly the most obvious approach. We were trying to check the cosine similarity in the retrieval part. So a question comes in, cosine similarity is used to find the most relevant documents, and then like in principle, you'd expect irrelevant documents to have low cosine similarity. This is what we were experimenting in the beginning, and we're still tracking it. And we're actually seeing that the gap in terms of cosine similarity is only large enough for completely irrelevant questions. So for example, I would get a tiny cosine similarity only if I asked it something irrelevant about a completely different topic, biology or physics or something completely out of the knowledge base.
Got it. So it's like as a threshold, if you're trying to use cosine similarity, that threshold relatively works, but only if the context is totally irrelevant. So if it's like somewhat irrelevant, it might have a harder time using that as like a classifier to distinguish. So you might want to need some other ways to understand, diagnose like bad retrieval.
Exactly. So what we kind of found out that works is if we're using GPT-4 as the synthesis LLM. So this isn't outside of what we talked before about evaluation. This is in the actual LLM called in the synthesis step of the RAG app. If it's GPT-4 that's the LLM that's being used, then it always highlights when the context is not enough to answer the question.
Got it.
So this is a game changer for us, and this is a metric that we've really been paying attention to, because for our use case, we really didn't want hallucinations because they would confuse the broker, it would be bad experience, and it would ultimately also potentially turn business away. So for us, GPT-4 being able to say, I don't have enough information based on the context, or this does not show up on the learning criteria, is great because the brokers can still reach out to customer support and go, hey, this hasn't really been helpful.
I want to talk a little bit about A/B testing. So you mentioned A/B testing that try different prompt strategies. How did you do this, and are there kind of like pros and cons to this approach? Like, did you test this on live users? Did you have enough like data points to get enough signal on which whether or not users preferred one type of prompt versus the other?
Yeah. So we're using A/B testing in production on live users at the moment. This becomes really easy to do. We get the question and we route it to a different prompt strategy. And on this side of the testing, we're focusing on not so much the factual accuracy as much as the user experience element. So we're kind of, for example, I'll give you an example of a different A/B tests that we're doing. We're seeing, for example, if the prompt asks GPT-4 to answer back in bullets, does it make a difference in terms of readability from the broker? Does the broker prefer the information being broken down, or do they want to read like a massive paragraph? So it's things like that. And the reason we're doing this is that we're still seeing brokers speaking to broker support, even if the actual answer from the RAG app is factually correct. So it's still very early days of LLMs and generative AI.
Interesting.
And we believe that people still want to speak to human agents, even if they get the correct answer from a bot.
So that's kind of like one of those things where you're getting like accurate retrieval, it's surfacing relatively the right answer, but maybe there's some element where, generally speaking, users still want to reach out to brokers. I think it's like a psychological thing too. Like I know when I'm on like customer support with like an airline or like so something like I would almost like always go to the like speak with the person option, and so maybe there is like some aspect of here that's like human behavior and like wired into their natural behavior patterns.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, I'm a bit like that in the sense that very often I find myself preferring to speak to a person just because I will go, I'm investing 10 minutes on this, but I know I will get the right answer. I think, as you're saying, must be something. It's a behavioral thing, and what we're trying to see is if this is different in terms of like, do they reach out to the customer support agents for complex questions, or do they reach out to the customer support agent for simple questions? In the ideal world, at the moment, we're seeing a mix of both. Like even for simple questions, they choose to brokers choose to speak to human agents. But in the ideal world, we would have all of the simple questions answered by the RAG app and kind of the very complex rare situations asked by human agents.
Makes sense. And then the lesson 4 on this article that you wrote was kind of this idea of evaluating retrieval in isolation, which is very interesting because I think that's also something that we typically advise people to do too, to try to make sure that your retrieval is very good. What are some strategies that you've developed for tuning retrieval and making sure that it improves?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a great question. So we actually, at first, we were using GPT-4 for the end-to-end evaluation, but also changing different retrieval mechanisms. This was suboptimal because obviously retrieval, as you've said, is a closed-ended task. For a given question, there is a specific number of documents in the knowledge base that contain the answer. So one could almost say that it's a bit of a missed opportunity not to try to evaluate it and experiment with retrieval mechanisms by having a defined evaluation set. So in terms of strategies, well, the most obvious one is tuning, for example, different values of K in the top K retrieval. We also played with the hide embedding, which was also very promising. And what we've been really excited to be playing with over the last 2 weeks has been the metadata feature in LlamaIndex. So I think this can be a game changer in the sense that you could almost be as aggressive and take the very hard questions that your model can't answer and add them as metadata on the knowledge base. So this will guarantee a perfect match every time.
Got it. And then when you were evaluating retrieval, did you notice that if, for instance, your retrieval mechanism retrieved like a bunch of documents that potentially were irrelevant, so even if the recall was high, if the precision was low, did you notice that like this actually caused the LLM to output like erroneous answers because it just had a ton of stuff that like wasn't actually relevant to the question?
So we were seeing that when in the beginning we were using GPT 3.5, but this was one of the problems, along with hallucinations that disappeared when we switched to GPT-4.
I see. So actually better models are able to deal with irrelevant context better. So then in that case, you could almost argue like precision maybe matters a little bit less and recall matters more. But for like worse models, maybe they do hallucinate more if you just feed a bunch of random information.
Exactly. I think it also kind of depends on the size of the knowledge base. Like as you observed before, our documents are pretty small, and they're already separated from each other quite nicely. For example, in LlamaIndex, in the documentation, many examples around using the Great Gatsby as a knowledge base. I think this is an example that's a much harder task in terms of retrieval because you're having very similar information brought up in different documents, while in our use case, the similarity between documents is pretty small. So this kind of makes the model, means that the penalty of retrieving irrelevant documents will be not massive because the question, the LLM will be still in terms of the context, be able to match the question to the right document retrieved.
Makes sense. Cool. And then the last question here is what's next? So you built this chatbot. It's in production and it's serving users. Are there broader use cases that you or your team are exploring or extensions to this chatbot?
So a couple of things that we're very excited to be trying right now is well, one is solving this problem that we discussed earlier about the behavioral problem of brokers still choosing to reach out to human agents. So we're trying to work out why this is happening and basically automate a larger slice out of broker questions. So that's step one. And then what we'd really like to do is we'd like to automate the entire chat experience or automate more parts of it. So we're keen to start playing with agents and, for example, get rid of the programmatic routing inside the chat, but delegate this to an agent, as in a chatbot agent that picks up the question, figures out what type of question it is, and then routes it to the right part within the chat flow.
Nice, that's exciting. And there's some basic to more advanced abstractions in LlamaIndex that could potentially help you with that, from like routers to like data agents to full on like, yeah, just give us some arbitrary set of tools. Cool. This is really exciting. Yeah, congrats on the success of CriteriaGPT, and thanks for your insights along evaluation, retrieval, A/B testing, and all these things. Yeah, thanks, Stelios, for your time. And that's it for the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jay. It was a pleasure being here and talking with you.